Well, hello, it's the 28th of April 2022. This is AKASHA Conversation number 5. I'm Philip Sheldrake. I work in research for the AKASHA Foundation, and it's just a pleasure to have you join us today. We're having a series of fantastic conversations around what it means to reflect on decentralized social networking. The emphasis has been on moderating so far, but I'll introduce our speaker today and contextualize what she will be speaking to in a moment. I'm just going to run through a few slides here just to set the scene. So this is a regular webinar. At the moment it's once a month, and it's all about the critical questions of decentralized social networking. As we like to say, if you think social networking is hard, try decentralizing it. But then we say, but is there any other way? So we're trying to encourage open dialogue and, most importantly, action. Dialogue is trying to make sense of things, meaning making, in order that we can do the right things together. We have a working definition of moderating, just to situate that in terms of the AKASHA conversations to date and the open design work that we're doing at the moment. And it's about structuring participation in the community. So it's about facilitating cooperation as well as preventing abuse. It's just keeping things going in the right direction. A subset of governance, in other words. And it's our intention to help co-create good governance of decentralized social networking, therefore good moderating systems. So that's the context that we're kind of focused on this half year of 2022 anyway. If you'd like to join us on Discourse, there's the QR code. Please join us there. We also have a post there already about this conversation. So if you want to join this conversation in the Discourse, during, that's fine, or indeed afterwards, look forward to seeing you there. And I should just add, before I go through and introduce Emaline, that some people love these proof of attendance thingamajigs, POAPs, I believe is how they're called it. Love POAPs too. So if you'd like to make sure that you can get a POAP for this conversation, then if you go to akasha.ethereum.world, my colleague Martin Etzrott will post there to say, hey, reply to this, and a POAP will be winging its way to your Ethereum address. So let me hand over to Emaline. Delighted you can join us. Very excited, especially anyone who's coming here with a doctorate in psychology. I mean, this is cool. We know that you're part of the Neighbourhoods team, but perhaps there's many people on this call who don't know much about Neighbourhoods. And I've put a one-sentence description on this slide here, but I know that Emaline will help us better understand what it's all about and the thesis that they're working to that relates to the AKASHA conversations. So I'll stop sharing the screen and hand over to you, Emaline. We'll do 25 minutes or so, however long it takes. Please store up your questions in the chat, in the Zoom chat. You can start putting them in there and then we can go through them. Either I can speak to them, or better still, good old-fashioned conversation. Feel free to unmute or even switch your webcam on so you can interact in conversation directly with Emaline. Look forward to that. Good.
Yeah, exactly. I wanted to say as well, you know, my intention here and everywhere is to limit jargon as much as humanly possible. And so if ever, you know, I'm saying something and you're like, I can't understand the idea because I don't know what that word means, please jump in. You're not interrupting, you are helping. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. Let's see how this goes. Can you all see?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay, wonderful. So the way that I thought to do this today, talking about intentional culture design, is very much to go through the project that I'm pretty much fully focused on right now. But, you know, really taking the opportunity to kind of go underneath some of the features and some of the plans that we have, to really get at some of these questions that hinge on like how intentional culture design kind of affects moderation and governance, like below the actual practices that we consider moderation and governance. So there are a couple questions in this key that might be useful before we start out. So thinking about, firstly, like how can the distributed web respond to kind of this critique of platform capitalism, which is that ultimately, like the fact that we're currently corralled into 4 or 5 online spaces for the most part, or anyway, most users are corralled into particular spaces for most of their online existence, kind of pushes this generic culture on all of us. I mean, to take the really, to take the most annoying example, maybe, you know, it's like there are billions of people all over the world using Facebook, which was invented kind of in line with the culture of a Harvard, of a college dormitory, right? And kind of created for the purposes of the boys in the dorm. Anyway, so the next question, like what counts as community autonomy in the design of online culture? So this is where thinking through neighborhoods is going to be really helpful, because we've had to broach directly this question of, well, what really matters in terms of online culture design? How can you design at the root for community autonomy over culture, knowing that people will post whatever memes they're going to post, will have whatever flame wars they're going to have, that sort of thing. And then the final question is, how do the features of peer-to-peer software, which in the case of neighborhoods means Holochain, which I can go more into for anyone who's interested, how do the features of peer-to-peer software plus this intentional culture design at the root impact our thinking about moderation? So perhaps to Philip's chagrin, a lot of what I'm talking about is going to be kind of like design before moderation. And I think the intention implicitly for me is to kind of tamp down the need, right? Like we're so used to the generic culture of the platform, you know, the big platforms that we use, that our thinking about moderation, mine anyway, tends to be rather fascistic. You know, like we get into stuff about banning particular words, or, you know, like cutting conversation off before it starts in various topics. So anyway. All right. So I'm going to explain a lot about neighborhoods. And then we'll kind of reel back and look at the design precepts that have influenced some of what neighborhoods is about. So like we said, Neighborhoods is a groupware and a socials framework for the distributed web. So essentially, it's tools for people who want to create communities on the web using DWeb software. And our big motto, and what really helps explain the project, is this notion of generic tech and specific culture. Right? Because we kind of consider it's like a flipping of the script, I believe, from the world we live in today, which is very much like software that's very specific, has really specific uses, but has a very generic culture, you know, is sort of meant for everyone in the world and their weird uncles and future employers and whoever. So, okay, so this notion of generic tools. So basically what we envision is kind of a framework for bundling really non-presumptuous, non-culturally presumptuous code modules. In Holochain, they're called HAPs instead of DAPs, with really basic functionalities that groups tend to need to function, irrespective of what it is that they're doing online, right? Like every online community is faced with kind of the trouble of being asynchronous, right? So we need things like calendars. We of course need chat apps. We might need collaborative docs or other sort of resource coordination frameworks. So for neighborhoods, we're thinking about all of these like kind of minimal functional code pieces. And we're thinking about them in a way that's decoupled from culture design and metrics that impact on culture. So it's like, what would it look like to use these really lightweight generic tools without them saying anything about entry and exit rules from the community, engagement incentives, likes, claps, what makes things visible, and the metrics that contribute to visibility, including, what orders are feed, for example, like what's now known as like the algorithm that operates behind the scenes. So to counter these generic tools or to add to them, right, we think about specific culture. And we've been thinking about that through this idea of social sense making. Like basically the way that culture begins is the way that groups make sense of themselves, of each other, and of the media objects or resources that they encounter together. So what this means for us so far is that groups can customize reactions, tags, and other sense-making inputs, including like components that go into reputation, basically thinking together, like, what do we want to optimize for in this space, right? Like it's often the case, we're quite used to social spaces online, I think, that offer this kind of same typical set of reactions that condition our behavior to the objects that we encounter together. We like them, we cry about them, we laugh at them, whatever it is, right? But you can really imagine, and we've been having fun imagining communities brought together for very specific purposes. Say you're a research group, and the media objects are papers in various states of completion, like you might want to set up a reaction framework that actually like has all the members denoting what stage of progress the research is in, or like what sorts of help the paper needs in order to be finished. Maybe it's like citation grabbing or like idea organization or something. So that's just one example. But then at the member level, so what individuals can do using this framework is that they can order their feeds, so like what they see personally, by the type of react or tag. And the big wager here, of course, is that that's going to be like a much better and more custom experience when it's actually and truly free of advertising influence. So in the spirit of specific culture, obviously you could choose to have a for-profit group and sort of do the paid post thing. Surely lots of crypto and DWeb groups are all about monetizing posts and paying for influence and this sorts of thing. So it's not like it's impossible to do that here, but for the purpose of group sense making and really specific use cases that aren't around monetizing posts, we've been thinking about, okay, so how actually does visibility and this sort of sense of efficacy that one has in influencing visibility change when advertising and paid posts are truly out of the picture? So advanced users using neighborhoods can also like alter scoring computations. So in our MVP, we made like a little meme network basically, and you could actually choose to weight. You could choose to weight differently different reactions in order to see particular types of things, based on your mood, whatever it is. And so obviously the challenge is to make that easy enough to understand that it's something that one can configure through a basic dashboard. So using peer-to-peer software, using Holochain, which is like a distributed ledger alternative to blockchain. So what this enables natively Holochain's design, which you can ask me about, but I won't go into. I assume some of you are familiar, maybe, sort of. So what that enables is data portability for members of various neighborhoods. And this is really like, for us, it's fun to envision like vast swaths of different neighborhoods operating together, because Holochain is like a protocol or a way of writing apps where basically people who author various data actually store them on their computers in what's called a source chain. And so going off from this, it's a lot easier to, you're recording your activity basically on your device. It's countersigned with whoever you're interacting with in the group space. But basically this facilitates sort of at the ground level, like reliable shareability into other neighborhoods. So it's really easy for neighborhoods to, really easy. It's a great technical challenge, but we hope that it will be very easy for, for neighborhoods to sort of build bridges to each other and do pingbacks for like using kind of like a trust but verify approach. So a new member comes into your neighborhood, you can look at some activity records through like an open badge type system and ping back to the other neighborhood and saying like, do you have records of all this? Or is this what your like neighborhoods level computation shows? That sort of thing. And I'll just mention for those of you who are excited about this sort of thing that it is far out on our roadmap. So like our MVP, for example, that shows some features of neighborhoods doesn't yet show these reputation badges with pingbacks for validation. Okay, getting to the culture before governance and moderation sort of idea. So basically our whole thing is like, how much can you design? Like, what can you do to design culture before, as is so popular in DAOs, for example, like what can you do to design culture before thinking about governance procedures and before thinking about moderation, which tends to kind of happen with a hammer, like I was talking about. So Neighborhoods offers these reputation and sense-making libraries. So like configurable, like I said, reactions and tags and social links. So we offer those and also a means of plugging them into those generic tools I was talking about. So you could decide to bundle together like a collaborative docs and like a media resource feed and a scheduler, right? And then kind of pair them with these sense-making little modules that we're also building. And it's probably worth mentioning that we hope to open the sense-making library build out to anyone who's interested, really. Like that would be totally open source, so y'all know. And the way that would happen would be through, so this bundling would happen through a setup wizard where you can choose these modules, you can choose sense-making and reputation data types. And then you would also, we would also offer dashboards for community governance. So I wanted to share some of, and these are pretty loose. These are kind of like the things that I've learned or been thinking about personally in this process of like envisioning neighborhoods and, crawling toward, toward their build out. So these are like my design precepts that are prior to moderation. So when one can spin up a social space with the same ease as making a Wix or a WordPress site, what this does is make it really easy for people to regroup, like to walk away with their data and to spin up a new group that operates similarly or makes a small tweak to the group that wasn't working before, basically to walk away. And that this puts pressure on the community, just knowing that this is the case, right? Like exit is quite easy. So that's one. Another is this sort of carrot, not stick idea. And basically, like, the whole point of neighborhoods is to, be using tags and reactions and social linking protocols and response protocols in such a way where the purpose of the space is very clear, right? Like, it's not a generic culture thing. It's like we're trying to do something specific together sort of idea. So the idea here is that, like, the clearer the purpose of the space, and the more obvious this is via front-end use of customizable metrics, the easier it is for you to optimize what you want and kind of freeze out those who aren't really trying to participate according to what the group values, right? So I was talking about the way that individuals and community rules kind of work together to create optimal feed ordering. So of course, you basically just don't see what the group isn't optimizing for in a lot of cases here. And the devil's in the details on this, I know, but general precept. And then one for this notion of social media. And this is not, like, my secret hope is that this generic notion of social media, like, comes to exist less and less the more groups develop specific purposes of being together online. But if you're gonna do social media, and these are things that we're working toward developing within neighborhoods. Like, if you're going to do social media, my sense is that the more person-focused your neighborhood, the more human it will be, the more humane it will be, excuse me. So what do we mean person-focused? I mean, like, actually bodily. Like, if you are hell-bent on civility in a generic social media space, like, require personal vouchers for new members, use an invitation system, require facial photos of the person. Like, typically flaming is much less when you're looking at the face of the person you're talking to, even if it's not moving, even if it's static, the conversation changes. That's my kind of hypothesis here. Another option that I find quite interesting is using voice recorded responses. Oftentimes we can type things that if we tried to speak them, we would think twice. So these are just a couple design ideas for social media in neighborhoods. And then one, I think this is, the last one. So, and this is more of a general hypothesis, I would say, for neighborhoods, which is that, when social sense making, customizable social sense making, rather than ads and paid posts, influences visibility, participation becomes meaningful enough that your group is actually likely to require fewer what I've been calling marches to City Hall, and less intensive moderation. And the feeling of efficacy or control is really key here. Like, when you push the reaction that then, upon refresh, reorders the feed such that, like, the post that you've reacted to in a major way moves to the top, for example, you actually know that your participation is meaningful. I think there are fewer questions around that. There's not the sort of looming ominous experience that we have now around social media, like, what's conditioning what I see, like, who's duping me, like, what's going on here, like, when you can actually see the effects of your actions, which I think is more likely in neighborhoods contexts. The hope is that less intensive moderation and less intensive governance might be required. But of course, I know we don't live in that ideal world. I know it's just a hypothesis. So when we do march to City Hall, right? I tend to, like, make fun of governance nerds for saying this. When we do march to City Hall, right? Governance in neighborhoods becomes, like, what do we want to do with our collective data, right? There's no, like, central source of collection. right? Which means that the platform or whoever runs the platform doesn't have the option of creating new feature sets or running little experiments on like the whole mass of user data that exists in the space. So when we do come together to ask, like, what do we want to change about daily life in this neighborhood? Or is there something that we want to see or understand better? You know, it becomes a question of asking for permission, basically, to collectivize data on some issue in order to solve some problem that's legitimately felt as a problem by participants. And as some of you probably know, you know, there are lots of tools for democratic decision-making, quadratic voting, voting by sortition. You know, there are also benevolent moderation dictatorships, right? Those exist too. I should probably say about neighborhoods, though, that like in the name of specific culture, like as per what I was discussing, we kind of have no political stance on that. But we will work to make these different decision-making tools available as pluggable generic modules, kind of the same as sense-making data types are. These generic modules that can be added to community management dashboards that we offer. So that's how'd I do on time? That's my portion.
Yes, perfect to the millisecond.
Awesome.
I thank you for those slides and for talking us through them. The first thing I would say is I do believe that we're not, you mentioned earlier that you might annoy me by trying to design out the need for moderating. However, our working definition says that we define moderating as structuring participation in the community to facilitate cooperation. So actually the design processes you're going through there, the design thinking is moderating ahead of the more traditional everyday use of the word moderating, which is, you know, that's an outrageous post, I want it deleted immediately, take this person out of circulation as far as this network goes, that sort of thing, which is very draconian. Mm-hmm. So it's beautifully aligned, and I thank you for walking us through what you're working on. Now, I don't want to do all of the Q&A. My job is to find the questions here. There's been some lovely ones coming through on the Zoom chat here. And I'm looking, there's a little in Zoom, you can mouse over at the bottom of the window and go to reactions and raise hand. So if you'd love to jump in and ask Emaline the question, perhaps that's in your mind, or perhaps you've already listed in the chat here, please raise your hand and then I can turn to, there you go, Martin, over to you. So what would you like to ask?
Emaline, a very nice talk. Thank you very much. And it's great to see that there's, there's interesting overlaps from also what we are working on with the AKASHA framework. And we have very similar thoughts. So it's great that Philip managed to have you on this call. And one question I have on the more technical side would be, and I tell you how we think about it. So what we are having as a prototype is the AKASHA Ethereum world, but we believe that the communities should be able in the mid to long term to create their own worlds, as we call it. So in your case, is neighborhoods.network, is this like one page where everyone goes, or is it also kind of like, not like a Fediverse, but like a decentralized world of different neighborhoods? Or how do you see, how will this be implemented?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I mean, from the beginning, we've kind of been trying to get out of the way as much as possible. But the fact of the matter is that within the Holochain ecosystem, we sort of came together perceiving this need around modularity. And so what we really intended to offer from the beginning was kind of like a whole set of examples that will probably exist in some kind of community-centered marketplace but a set of examples of like the tiniest possible functional modules. So like envisioning these functional pieces that really don't presume anything about the group's culture, because we thought, wow, you know, there's really a risk that in this space people will you know, kind of like for lack of other ideas, kind of try to rebuild platforms with everything that they have in them on Holochain. And we thought, wow, you know, like for a truly distributed world, or for everyone to be able to take, you know, to benefit from the affordances of distributed data holdings, and like these walk away and like federated options that I was describing, for people to be able to take advantage of that, we'd like to see groups built out using really modular apps, really tiny pieces. And so we thought, okay, you know, surely like people experimenting with Holochain will be kind of building these left and right. Like if you follow their Twitter, you'll see like, oh my gosh, like someone built out like a kind of a Zoom clone on Holochain this weekend or whatever. So we were thinking like, okay, it would be so nice for there to be like a stripped down space for people to collect these basic modules without having to like spin up whole platform businesses. And so we were like, probably the best thing we could offer would be a means to bundle these together, and also some examples of like the cultural components that you could add to them. So we're trying to be the glue rather than trying to be like, we know that there's a risk of becoming like the mega platform that facilitates all of this, right? But that is why, and this is maybe like a typical crypto-y solution, but that's why we ended up launching a token that basically is like, okay, this can be used for paying developers to create these really non-presumptuous little modules, and also these little cultural components that groups can put together. So it kind of ended up being the case that like a marketplace solution for us was a way to be the glue while stepping out as much as possible.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Hey, Wasim.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks a lot, Emaline, for your presentation. That was like really a refreshing take on social networking and community organization. And you know, the first thing I want to do right now is check out what communities have built with Neighbourhoods, but I'm not sure yet at which stage of development Neighbourhoods is at. So hence my question, did communities already start playing with the tools you provide with the social sense maker? And if yes, is there any way where those communities are maybe listed or aggregated?
Sorry, what was the last thing you said? These communities are
listed or aggregated somewhere.
So unfortunately, no. We're basically like immediately post fundraising right now, which is why it's like big ideas right now. But we do have so we have an MVP that is meant to be demonstrative of how the system works, in the sense that like and I can post this stuff, I guess, on the discourse forum.
Yeah, please.
But there's a video,
that's the meme
and
community you talked about.
Yeah. Okay. So it kind of shows how you can use pluggable reaction types and then also do some of that individual feed ordering based on changing the scoring computation for what becomes visible. But a lot of this, like I'll say that the startup wizard, like what we've been calling like the community activator wizard for booting up a new neighborhood, is like our next big milestone. So we're not there yet.
I've just seen a little chat in here that says, from Guy James, says, this is what the internet should have been all along, sigh. So that sounds like a bit of a vote of confidence, if ever there was one. I wondered if I could pick up on your reference to faces, because obviously, and I'm probably, as an engineer, thinking, I've got some time with a psychologist, this is fantastic, I can find out some more. But you obviously are referring to the fact that we've evolved as a species to effectively look at each other in the eye and recognize each other again, outside of the bureaucracy of identity. That whole idea of identity in the community perspective is sense-making. Identity is a sense-making capacity. Who should I cooperate with? Who do I value cooperating with? I should cooperate with them again. But this is where digitalization starts to throw in some problems as well as some opportunities. We know that we can programmatically recognize faces and not necessarily for cooperative means, cooperative ends. Do you have any reservations about emphasizing one bringing one's face to a digitalized social network?
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of senses, it's a radical idea because a large subsect of internet enthusiasts, I believe, are like, it's like the anonymity crowd. And I guess, I mean, reservations notwithstanding, I kind of like personally, I'm ready to move past that, basically. Like I think that we have enjoyed a lot of the fruits of anonymity, and that people are really seeking a different sort of experience of being together online. And obviously this is not for everyone, I mean, I don't think that I think it would be in addition rather than an either or. And my caveat in the presentation was like, if you're hell-bent on civility, like I think a lot of people who are interested in moderation are, kind of hoping like, why can't these be like civil spaces of public discourse? And, like, why is it that when we are speaking asynchronously and through text only, do people get so nasty? Do like sort of the worst elements of people come out? And it's really, so just for those specific instances, right, when you're kind of trying to bring out like the most generous responses and the most sort of capacious mutual understandings, kind of basic psychological principle is like, yes, look at the face. Like, remember that you're speaking to another human being. That's going to sort of change your dialogical imagination.
Yes.
Like you can imagine that face responding. You can imagine that face reacting. It's still a dint of imagination, right? I mean, realistically, the fact that our faces are so plastic gives us most of the social cues that I think social media is trying to add back in through a lot of the means that I've been describing.
I'm going to bring Guy in now, but I'm just going to make one comment, which is, I don't know if you can see the same people on this scene as me, but I definitely personally couldn't be nasty to the panda either. I mean, come on, that's cute. But anyway, Guy, you have a comment on this particular thread?
Yeah. Hey, Emaline.
Hey, Guy. It's good to see you.
You too. Yeah, my question was kind of a technical one. Once you've kind of made your neighborhood, once you've gone through the sort of wizard to choose the components you want, is it possible to then go back and sort of recompose it? Because you might decide that you made a mistake in the original, because in a way you maybe don't know what you need until you actually grow a community.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's what I was calling like the march back to City Hall, right? Because the way that Holochain works, it does require, like, if you're going to update those components or add new ones, that often requires. We're actually trying to limit the degree to which it requires fresh installs in neighborhoods, but I think oftentimes it will, and so that buy-in becomes like, not like a dint of goodwill. It becomes a necessity, right? So it is iterable. You can add. It's harder to take away components, but of course you can add, and you can change, and it makes it a lot. Yeah, basically, yes, to answer your question. You can do that.
Can you like disable components on it rather than completely remove them to test it?
I believe so. I mean, that would be, yeah, that's our aim. Unfortunately, I can't really speak to a lot more technical detail there. But it definitely, yeah. Like I'm thinking in particular for like a set of reactions, right? Like if one becomes particularly confusing, if a tag becomes outdated in what the neighborhood is trying to do, yes, you could remove pretty easily. I think you can actually do that in our MVP example.
Awesome.
Hey, Martin.
Yeah, I'd like to come back to this question I asked before when you were talking about the way it's being set up, and that relates also to this moderation topic. It's about the size and the anticipated size of the communities. The reason why I think it's important to keep the size in mind is also because when you have a small group, things and dynamics usually can work. I mean, they can also work not well, but normally people come together for a specific purpose. You know, they are sharing some values, and it's easier to handle that than when it's thousands of people. So what is your, just put it as a question, what is your anticipation? Is this something where neighborhoods are going to be in the dozens or in the hundreds or in the thousands?
Yeah, in terms of membership, you're saying, not in terms of, yeah. So I think we've kind of been thinking about it from opposite poles. Like on one hand, it's quite easy to envision like what would be required for a working group to operate as a neighborhood. And I think something that I've been wanting out of neighborhoods personally is these sort of like project spaces that would be kind of like a G Suite alternative, basically, but distributed, or like a May 1st instance or disroot, you know, these sort of like packages of P2P tools. So on the one hand, like I think neighborhoods will be really easy to configure and source participation on accomplishing a very specific goal. You know, like ordering something in terms of importance, in completing various like group authored outputs, that sort of thing, in having, you know, even you could do these AKASHA talks, right, as a neighborhood, and maybe you would want to have you know, people who ask the best questions be able to nominate speakers for the next time or something like that. But then on the other side, we've been thinking about this in terms of like massive meme networks, right? And that was reflected in the first MVP, and thinking about the space between this basically as like this vast gulf, where, you know, what would be really important in a larger group that scales like enormously, would be this degree of individual autonomy from a more generic neighborhood. So despite all our stuff about, you know, generic tech and specific culture, like if you did want to create more of a typical platformy sort of instance, where it's just like it's a social media instance, it's a meme sharing network, that sort of thing, then like a wedge emerges between like collective and individual views. And what becomes really important is creating a degree of individual freedom to select and to choose what they care about within this enormous mass of group activity. And that's also where reputation becomes important, right? Depending on entry and exit requirements, which would be kind of something that would set out from the start and maybe be iterated as it moves along. Whereas if you're in a working group, right, you probably don't need as many, you know, you can probably operate like on an invite only principle or a vouch system, without requiring any kind of agent-centric reputational components, unless you want to create like a system for small permissions. So basically, like the big things that change in thinking like micro to macro for neighborhoods group participation would be like reputation components that give rise to permissions, and also like the difference between individual and collective views, which I think would become greater and greater, the need for that as a neighborhood grows.
I have a question, Emaline.
Yes.
Culture is one of those things that most people, without your education and experience, can kind of roughly point at what it might be. They can probably tell you what it feels like to be in a certain group. But it's my experience personally that it's very difficult to be explicit about how one culture is different to another culture is different to another culture. And therefore, it's also very difficult to say, well, this is the kind of culture we want, so we need to make these design selections from the permutations that the marvelous neighborhood teams have made available to us. So do you envisage offering a way for people to make choices according to where they'd like to end up, as opposed to just make it up as they go along, which I guess has value as well? I don't know. I mean, experimentation and experimentation is going to be part and parcel of every culture, but I'm just wondering if you're going to try and allow people to think culturally, or whether you see that as mission critical.
Yeah, you know, I wish to be able to spend more time on that in the day-to-day. I think as a team, we've been kind of like quietly optimizing for iterability and to make it easier for groups to be able to disband if something goes wrong, to be able to change out components like we were talking about. But I think the educational aspect is really important, because like when I think culture, I think time, actually, like the timing of interactions, like the way that people like approach each other, the space that lapses between a response. Like time plays a really interesting role in the way that we interact, and the way that we understand things. And so that's just one example that I kind of like to throw out there. The timing of an interaction, or the timing that it takes to metabolize some idea. And so I do think that, I mean, we certainly don't want to be like we don't want our content, we don't want the stuff that we put out to be limited to like token shilling. And I think that what you're describing is, various ways of thinking about social interactivity, different degrees of complexity of, the games we play together, the rituals that we do to kind of like keep things moving. Like, I'm kind of swoony, like, oh my gosh, wouldn't it be great if that's what we could focus on right now? But yeah, I think that education is really important. And I think that our campaigns and the materials we offer for people to understand the value of neighborhoods in the first place should really be quite a bit about that.
See, there's an aspect of bringing the humanity into it, into digitally augmented social network. So when I say social networking, I mean, we've always done social networking, even before the internet and the web, if you like. It's about how we come together and socialize in community in order to contribute and derive mutual value. That's exactly what we're trying to, that's how our species has evolved to be the most dominant species on the planet. And I feel like you're almost being a biomimic, in as much as you're trying to port a lot of those good qualities that have got our species this far into the digitalized world. Is that, are you a biomimetic team? Is that your modus operandi?
Huh. We've never used that word, but I understand what you're saying. And I think that a lot of the reason that I was drawn toward Holochain's architecture in the first place, you know, I'm a student, perpetual student of psychoanalysis. And I thought, oh my gosh, like there's really something about like the way that individual ideas are held in separation, or that individuals' activity is sort of held separately from, but corresponds so deeply to kind of like the consensus reality view on this or that space. This really reminds me of the way that we talk about the unconscious. That and the sort of principle of gossip as validation. I thought, okay, this is sort of like taking how we know, for better or for worse, how we know social groups to operate, and kind of conceding like, yes, the ways that we sort of like, you know, expand out our network of friends, our circles of trust. This is very much kind of mimicking how that works in the architecture. And can I actually add something that you made me think of, Philip? Yeah. Okay, so I think another really important part, like, of the culture design is that people often think about like, okay, well, obviously this is a social space. We need to think about how interactions work. You know, how we respond to each other, how we validate each other, how we recognize each other's contributions. But I actually, one line that I'm hoping to develop in the future around this, I actually think that one of the key affordances of social spaces, you know, for sort of self-improvement and development of what they can offer, is the way that they give a chance for individuals to understand their actions more clearly. So I think even in addition to thinking about how social interaction goes down as like a first principle, I'm really excited about the way that kind of like collections of user data and like easy availability of one's past actions. I'm kind of interested in the self-learning that's made possible there. You know, like what we can learn about ourselves and our own motivations for being in a social space. You know, it's like if you have like a neat collection of all the responses you give and you're able to read them over in like a human viewable way, it's actually possible to say like, like every time I respond to a post, it's kind of like with like with some sarcasm, or it's kind of snarky. Like, what is it that I'm trying to, what is it that I'm trying to do here, really? You know, or like, oh, every time I respond, in fact, I'm linking people to other resources that I want them to see. You know, you can kind of develop an identity as a gadfly or as a social worker in the, you know, in the shared spaces that you're in. And so I think it's quite exciting that people can learn about themselves and their motivations and what games they're trying to play with other people, you know, from having clear views on their data over time in social spaces.
That's a beautiful point. Thank you. Irene.
Okay. Hi. I hope I can gather my thoughts in a useful way. I'm thinking about culture creation. And I'm thinking about how different communities are trying to make the rules of the game in a way that fosters quality of interactions and a field in the group, in the community. So every group does it in a set of points. Like if you're here, these are the orientation points, framework points, whatever, of behavior. These are the rules here, right? And some people are not explicit about them. I'm thinking about the modules and how they could help with that, because I see that there's a really deep need for groups that they don't have the experience or the expertise on how to frame that, how to build that field, and they cannot have each one of them a culture creator in the group, taking care of it all the time. So how could modules or what could help with that? Because the quality and the and all the values and the principles that we want to build with, it's not only the structure and the architect, I don't know the pronunciation, architecture, that make the behavior. It's also the rules, but we don't want to call them rules. So we want to foster the behavior. So I'm thinking about that. Have you thought about it?
So I'm kind of understanding, I'm hearing you a little bit similarly to what Philip was asking, in terms of almost like ways to create education around culture creation that would kind of like pair with some of these modules that are not in themselves very suggestive. Is that kind of what you're getting at? Or are you thinking like at a policy level?
Not policy, but the modules itself, could they help with that? Could they, like a framework or sorts?
Yeah, so we, I guess like in a sense, I know that what you're saying, like I know that some groups will require more help than others for sure. But like our whole thing basically is trying to get out of the way and not really be presumptuous about, about what it is that people are trying to do with these like generic modules. So it's a little bit counter to the point, to try and add like suggestive, to kind of bake in suggestive principles to them. But hearing your and Philip's comments like in conjunction is really making me think, wow, like how helpful would it be to have some sort of like manual of cultural precepts, like if you bake something in here like this, these are the problems you might run into, like that sort of thing. And I think it's a research project that it's probably worth inviting more folks into and embarking on. For sure. Yeah.
I love the idea. I would vote for that, and I would participate even.
We may end up having a neighborhoods around culture design for neighborhoods, like a little kind of an educational material creation neighborhood or something.
Well, in the chat here, Greg is already riffing off the idea of community development recipes. So that sounds like it'll be in the mix.
And recipe ratings. That would be a great way also to address, I think, Martin's the scaling question and the group size question. Probably our best bet would be to crowdsource some of that wisdom. Yeah.
The only problem with a conversation this good is, as a chair, I have to say it's the top of the hour. But at least in this instance, I can say that the conversation can continue. You'll have seen the links to the forum, the discourse forum in the chat. I hope to see you on there. It's an asynchronous way to continue the conversation, but it's a bloody valuable conversation. And I would love to thank everyone for joining us today. And in that sort of old-fashioned sense, I wondered if you might unmute and we can do that old, that thing where we actually clap and thank Emaline for her time today. Thank you.
Oh my gosh.
It's been brilliant that you could join us today, Emaline. Thank you so much for bringing your insight, your expertise, and for taking the time. Much appreciated.
This was so much fun. Thank you, Philip. And please find me online if you want to keep chatting. I'm like very available. So.
Thanks again, everyone. Take care. See you at towards the end of May for the next AKASHA Conversation.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.